Hi, I'm Nicholas from RTINGS.com. Today we'll be doing a review of the Acer Nitro XV252Q Fbmiiprx. We'll be evaluating it on our standardized test bench to see how it performs and if you should buy it. The Acer Nitro XV252Q is unique because it's the first monitor with a remarkable 390Hz max refresh rate. Well, it's actually a 360Hz monitor that you could overclock to 390Hz, and we'll talk about that later in the video. Unlike most other 360Hz monitors we've tested, it has FreeSync variable refresh rate support instead of native G-Sync support. It has a 1080p resolution and a 25-inch screen. As for the variants, this is where it could get a bit confusing. There's a similar monitor called the Acer AOpen XV252Q which seems to be the same monitor. There are similar monitors in the Acer Nitro lineup, like the XV252Q Fbmiiprx, which has a 280Hz refresh rate instead. Always check the full model code to make sure you're buying the right monitor. The XV252Q has a pretty simple design that looks like most other Acer monitors. Although it's a gaming monitor, it doesn't have any gamer-heavy aesthetics. The stand doesn't support the screen very well as there's noticeable wobble. Luckily, it has excellent ergonomics, so it's easy to place in an ideal position. The stand's round base allows you to turn the screen a full 360 degrees. You can also rotate it into portrait mode in either direction, which is great as you could choose which side the inputs will be on. The XV252Q doesn't offer much in terms of inputs. It has two HDMI inputs and a DisplayPort input, which is pretty standard for any monitor. However, it doesn't have any USB ports, so you can't connect your keyboard and mouse directly to the monitor. Now, let's take a look at the test. We'll start with the contrast. A high contrast ratio is important if you use the monitor in the dark for deep, dark blacks. Like any monitor with an IPS panel, it has a mediocre contrast ratio. This means that blacks look gray in the dark, so it's not a good choice for darkroom gaming. Sadly, it doesn't have a local dimming feature to improve the contrast. Now, a high peak brightness is important either in a bright room to counteract glare, or if you want brighter highlights and a more impactful image in HDR games. Luckily, the SDR peak brightness is great. There's very little variation in brightness with different scenes, so small and bright scenes are equally as bright. It also gets bright enough to fight glare in most well-lit rooms. As for HDR, it gets slightly brighter than in SDR, but it's not enough to deliver an impactful HDR experience. Small highlights don't pop, which is disappointing if you're a fan of playing HDR games. Also important for a bright room is good reflection handling. The XV252Q has great reflection handling. Reflections on the matte finish don't get distracting, which is great. Combined with the high peak brightness, you won't have any issue using this in a bright room. When you're not gaming and you want to scroll through menus or browse the web, it's important to have good text clarity. This helps make text look clear and legible. The XV252Q has a 1080p resolution, so text isn't as sharp as on 1440p and 4K monitors because it has a lower pixel density. Still, the smaller 25-inch screen increases the pixel density compared to 27-inch screens with a 1080p resolution. This means that it has decent text clarity and it's good enough for reading in-game messages without any problems. Good viewing angles are important to ensure details don't look washed out when viewing from the sides. Like other IPS panels, this monitor has wide viewing angles. The image remains accurate if you're looking at it from the sides. Overall uniform screen brightness and color is important when playing video games to avoid distracting areas that are overly dark or bright. The XV252Q has excellent gray uniformity, which is typical of most monitors. The sides are a bit darker than the rest, but the difference is minimal and you won't notice it in real content. As for the black uniformity, it's more disappointing. It has visible backlight bleed throughout, which is a typical problem with IPS panels known as IPS glow. The screen also looks blue because of the low contrast, and once again, there's no local dimming to improve it. Accuracy in the standard sRGB color space is important as it's the standard for computer use. Fortunately, The XV252Q has a remarkable out-of-the-box accuracy. It has a very accurate sRGB picture mode, which locks colors to the sRGB color space. This means that colors don't appear oversaturated and they have minimal inaccuracies. However, the sRGB mode locks other picture settings, which is disappointing if you want to fine-tune certain settings to your liking. If you want to take full advantage of this monitor and display vivid colors, it's important for the monitor to display a wide color gamut. This monitor does exactly that because it has an excellent SDR color gamut. It displays nearly all of the sRGB color space that's used in most web content. However, it has a limited HDR color gamut, and colors aren't the most vivid either due to the low HDR peak brightness. A high refresh rate is important for gaming. It allows the image to be drawn on the screen faster, which makes it more responsive. If the monitor supports variable refresh rates, then you could get a tear-free gaming experience regardless of the changing frame rate. As we mentioned from the start, this is the first 390Hz monitor on the market, so it has an incredibly fast refresh rate. However, you could only achieve that fast refresh rate with an NVIDIA graphics card over a DisplayPort connection. It's not officially certified by NVIDIA to be G-Sync compatible, but we confirm that G-Sync VRR works. As for FreeSync VRR, it only works over a DisplayPort connection up to 360Hz, and even at that, only on higher end graphics cards. It works with a RX 6600 XT graphics card, but it didn't work with our RX 580, so we expect it to work with newer graphics cards. Sadly, FreeSync doesn't work at all over HDMI, including with consoles like the Xbox Series X. All this to say is that it's best if you use a DisplayPort connection and have an NVIDIA graphics card because FreeSync support is unreliable, but it's possible it's a firmware bug too. When playing video games, a fast response time is important for the clearest image possible without distracting blur. Luckily, the XV252Q has an incredibly fast response time at its max refresh rate. Motion looks extremely smooth and there's virtually no motion blur. This is fantastic for even the most competitive gamers. If the frame rate drops when you're gaming, then you're in luck because it still has a fast response time at 60Hz. The response time is slower across most transitions compared to its max refresh rate, but it's still very quick. The motion handling is once again fantastic. However, we don't suggest enabling the overdrive setting if you're gaming at 60Hz because there's too much overshoot on any of the settings. If you really want the clearest image when playing fast-paced games, then the backlight strobing feature is useful to reduce persistence blur. The XV252Q has an optional BFI setting that works over a wide refresh rate range, but not at a lower refresh rate. This is disappointing because the BFI is most useful with lower frame rate content. Sadly, like most monitors, you can't use it with VRR enabled. A low input lag is also really important for a responsive feel when playing video games, and like most gaming monitors, it has extremely low input lag. You won't notice any delay, especially when gaming at 390Hz. Although it's a bit higher than other monitors at 60Hz, you won't notice a difference and gaming feels responsive. So this brings us to the main question. Should you buy this monitor? First off, if you're looking for a high refresh rate gaming monitor, then this is definitely an excellent choice. Deciding whether or not to buy this monitor really comes down to which graphics card you have. If you have a high-end AMD graphics card and you want to use the native FreeSync support, it's definitely worth getting this monitor if you could find it because there aren't many other 360Hz monitors with native FreeSync support. However, if you have an NVIDIA graphics card and want to take advantage of it with native G-Sync support, there are other options for you. Both the Dell Alienware AW2521H and the Asus ROG Swift PG259QN have a 360Hz refresh rate with native G-Sync support. They also both have support for NVIDIA's Reflex Latency Analyzer, which measures the latency of your entire PC setup. Of course, if you're not a fan of the 1080p resolution, you should go for something with a 1440p resolution, but that means you'll have to sacrifice on the refresh rate. Something like the HP Omen 27C is in the same price range, and it has a 1440p resolution with a 240Hz refresh rate. That means you'll still get a fast gaming experience with an immersive resolution.